They laughed before he finished the sentence. Laughed like it was a joke. Like the very idea that someone like him could belong somewhere like that was too much to believe. The bell had rung 5 minutes earlier, but the laughter lingered, sticky and loud, bouncing off the beige classroom walls. It was spring in Houston, but the air conditioning buzzed like it was July. In the back row, Jamal sat with his fingers tightening around the fabric of his hoodie. He didn't cry. He didn't speak again. He just stared at the poster above the whiteboard, a rocket mid-launch, flames in bloom, and wished he'd kept his mouth shut. Outside, a lawnmower droned past the window, slicing through the silence the way truth sometimes does, unnoticed, necessary. Inside, a teacher shuffled papers, not quite meeting his eyes. And somewhere a man wiped oil off his hands, standing beneath the bones of a retired space shuttle, unaware that his son had tried to lift him up and been laughed back down. The stars weren't out yet, but soon someone would look up. It began as a ripple, a slight smirk from a boy named Kyle in the second row. Then a louder chuckle from Marissa near the windows. Within seconds it had become a tide, rising through the classroom, crashing in waves of laughter that swept across desks and drowned out the quiet voice that had started it all. Jamal hadn't raised his hand to show off. He had only answered the teacher's question. "Does anyone know someone who works in science or engineering?" And with a calm, almost hesitant voice, he'd said, "My dad works at NASA." That was it. 5 words, spoken with a mix of pride and restraint, like he already knew what might come next. Kyle leaned back in his chair, grinning. "You mean like cleaning the floors?" Someone else snorted. Another mimicked a launch countdown in mockery. A girl whispered something Jamal couldn't hear, but the words didn't matter anymore. Just the heat spreading across his ears and the way his body tensed, shrinking with each burst of laughter. Ms. Rowe, the science teacher, tried to hush the class. "That's enough," she said, but her voice lacked force. Her eyes darted away from Jamal's, landing instead on her lesson plan. It was easier that way. Jamal sat still, shoulders stiff. He looked straight ahead, refusing to glance at anyone. The rocket poster above the board, the same one he'd admired every day since September, now felt like it was watching him too. No one asked him to explain. No one gave him the benefit of doubt. They'd already decided. His skin, his hoodie, his neighborhood, none of it aligned with their image of astronauts, engineers, or scientists. He clenched his jaw. Not in anger, but in defense, like his body was bracing against something it couldn't name. When the bell finally rang, he didn't move. The classroom emptied around him. Backpacks zipped, sneakers squeaked, chairs scraped. And still he sat there, waiting for the shame to loosen its grip. Outside, the sky was bruised with early evening light, orange bleeding into purple. He walked home slower than usual, hands in his pockets, head down. A boy on a scooter passed him, music blasting from a speaker. Jamal didn't look up. At the apartment complex, the air smelled of fried food and warm concrete. Someone argued 2 floors up, a dog barked. Jamal took the stairs 2 at a time, like always, except today it didn't feel like habit. It felt like escape. Inside, the apartment was quiet. His dad's boots sat by the door, worn and caked with something dark, maybe grease, maybe oil. The TV was off. The kitchen smelled faintly of garlic and something roasted. His father emerged from the hallway, wiping his hands on a rag. "Hey, champ," he said. "How was school?" Jamal didn't answer right away. He looked at the man in front of him, tall, broad-shouldered, hands calloused and stained. Not the kind of man you saw in documentaries about Mars missions, but the man who had taught him how to align a telescope, who had once built a model rover from scrap metal and old wheels, who still wore a NASA badge on his keyring, long after no one at his current job asked him what it meant. "I told them," Jamal said finally, his voice small. "About you. About where you work." The man paused. His eyes narrowed just slightly, not in suspicion, but in reading, as if trying to catch the words between the words. Jamal looked down. They laughed. There it was. No build-up, no tears, just 2 words. A quiet wound handed over like an offering. His father didn't flinch, didn't wince. He just nodded slowly, as if he'd known this moment would come someday. "They don't know me," he said softly. "That's not their fault, but it's not yours either." Jamal didn't respond. He walked past his father and disappeared into his room, where the model rover sat on his desk unfinished, where a photo of him at Johnson Space Center hung crooked on the wall, where silence came easier than explanation. His father stood in the hallway a moment longer, then turned and went back to the kitchen, the rag still in his hands. The same hands that had once calibrated satellites, now used to clean cafeteria floors. He didn't curse the laughter, didn't blame the teacher. He just stared out the window above the sink, where the sky was darkening, and whispered to no one, "They don't know me." But maybe they should. The janitor uniform didn't carry a name badge, just a patch that said Facilities Support above the left pocket. It was the kind of uniform meant to make a person invisible. The color, a faded navy. The fabric, stiff from too many industrial washes. The fit, always a little too loose or a little too tight, but never quite right. That was the point. Make it utilitarian, not personal. Isaiah Warren walked the hallways of Belridge Middle School every weekday by 5:30 a.m. sharp. His steps were steady, purposeful, silent. He greeted the front desk staff with a nod, never small talk. Checked the boiler pressure, ran his palm along the baseboards for dust, tested the emergency exit doors like a man who took nothing for granted. To the students, he was just the janitor. Maybe Mr. Warren, if they were feeling polite. He was the man who swept spilled juice, unclogged sinks, replaced broken ceiling tiles, always with that same quiet expression, not annoyed, not resigned, just precise. But Jamal knew. He knew how those hands, thick-knuckled and rough, had once assembled cooling systems for satellite imaging arrays, how the same man who scrubbed chewing gum from lockers could explain orbital mechanics without pausing to think. He knew because every night, after the world had taken from his father what it wanted, Isaiah still gave what he could to his son. When Jamal was 7, he asked how rockets don't fall back down. Isaiah didn't just answer. He drew diagrams, brought out a tennis ball and string, made Jamal feel like wonder was his birthright. But Isaiah rarely spoke about the past. Jamal only knew bits. A story here, a photograph there, an old ID badge tucked in a drawer. A letter from NASA dated 1997, with an offer that once changed everything. And then, much later, a silence that said even more. At Belridge, no one asked Isaiah what he did before. The principal didn't know. The teachers didn't care. Maybe someone had once read something in his file, maybe not. It didn't matter. He cleaned, he fixed, he left. What none of them knew was how carefully he watched. Not just the pipes and wires, but the students. The way Jamal's eyes dropped when certain boys walked by, the way his shoulders curled inward during dismissal. Isaiah noticed every shift, every silence. So when Jamal came home quiet that night, not angry, not broken, just dimmed, Isaiah felt it in his chest, not like a blow, like a slow compression, the kind that steals breath without sound. He wanted to tell him the truth, all of it, about why he left the agency, about what he saw, about how in 2002 his department was quietly restructured after he reported a racist supervisor, how he was reassigned, given smaller roles, then pushed toward a voluntary transition that wasn't really voluntary. How at the last meeting a junior engineer was handed his project, a white man who used Isaiah's own design slides as if they were his. But what good would that do for a 12-year-old? What would he even understand? So instead he asked, "You still got that telescope I gave you?" Jamal nodded from his bedroom door. "Let's take a look tonight. Mars is close this month." That was Isaiah's way. No speeches, just presence. That night on the apartment rooftop, Jamal sat beside his father under a dome of stars. The city lights blurred the edges, but not enough to hide the constellations. Isaiah adjusted the telescope, murmuring coordinates like lullabies. Jamal peered through the lens, then pulled back wide-eyed. "It's red," he said. "Closer than it's been in years," Isaiah replied. For a moment the classroom laughter faded. The ridicule dissolved. Up here nothing could reach them. Later, as they packed up, Jamal asked, "Why don't you tell people about NASA, about what you used to do?" Isaiah didn't answer right away. He folded the tripod, careful with the joints, then softly, "Because some people can't imagine men like me doing things like that. And I got tired of trying to prove them wrong." Jamal frowned. "But they should know." Isaiah looked at him, a long look that held both sorrow and pride. "Maybe it's your turn to make them see." Downstairs, the apartment buzzed with life. TVs on, neighbors arguing, sirens in the distance. But on that roof under that sky, it was quiet. Isaiah stood tall, silhouetted against the stars, and for the first time in a long while, he wondered if silence had been the right choice after all. Before he wore gloves soaked with bleach water, before his name faded into the background noise of middle school hallways, Isaiah Warren had stood in a control room where everything hummed. There the air was dry and chilled, laced with the scent of metal and ozone. Computers blinked in quiet synchrony. People spoke in clipped tones, each word calculated, no one raising their voice. He had been the only black engineer on the floor, but that wasn't what he remembered most. What stayed with him were the launch nights, when everything built to a single countdown, and silence wrapped around the room just before ignition. He used to think that silence was holy. It was the sound of 1,000 calculations aligning, the hush before something defied gravity. Isaiah's path there hadn't been typical. No Ivy League degree, no family legacy of scientists. Just raw talent, grit, and a high school physics teacher who'd pulled him aside one day and said, "You've got it, but you need to believe that first." He'd graduated from Prairie View A&M, worked nights while finishing his master's, and clawed his way into NASA through a junior assistant role. It took years. Years of proving, of biting his tongue, of showing up earlier and staying later than everyone else. But by 1998, he was co-leading a thermal systems team. He'd helped launch satellites that still orbited the Earth. And then, one decision. In 2002, after a white supervisor made a public comment about people who clean the floors pretending to build rockets, Isaiah filed a report. Not because he expected change, but because Jamal had just been born, and he couldn't imagine raising his son with silence as a lesson. What followed was subtle. Meetings without invitations, emails with missing attachments, a performance review that questioned his team adaptability. Within a year, he was offered a consulting position outside his department. The message was clear: leave quietly or be pushed. He took the severance, moved to Houston, started over. He told people he wanted more time with his son. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Now, 2 decades later, he still fixed things, different things, toilets, light fixtures, jammed lockers. But it was work, and work, to Isaiah, had always been sacred. Still, something had shifted after that rooftop night with Jamal. The boy's words, "They should know," echoed louder than the classroom laughter ever had. He found himself digging through old boxes that weekend, not out of nostalgia, but necessity. He dusted off a binder filled with mission schematics, held his NASA ID, edges curled, photo faded. There was a time when he couldn't bear to look at these things. Now they felt like proof, not to others but to himself. Monday came, and with it, career day. The flyer had been tucked near the front office, almost missed. Jamal had seen it, mentioned it casually over breakfast. "They're asking parents to come talk about their jobs." Isaiah had nodded. "You want me to sign up?" Jamal shrugged. "I don't know, you don't have to." Isaiah watched him for a moment. "You want me to?" A pause, then quieter. "Yeah." And so he did. That week, he stayed late cleaning the auditorium himself, making sure the chairs didn't creak, the floor didn't stick. No one noticed, but that was fine. He wasn't doing it for them. He also made copies, diagrams, photos from his old missions, even a short animation he'd once helped design. Jamal helped him format everything into a presentation. They sat at the kitchen table for hours, laughing, arguing over font sizes, remembering things Isaiah hadn't spoken of in years. The night before, Jamal asked, "Are you nervous?" Isaiah smiled. "I've stood next to rockets on launch day, son. Talking to 7th graders, I'll be fine." But in truth, he was nervous. Not about speaking, about being seen, about offering up a part of himself that had long lived in silence, about the risk they'd laugh again. On the morning of career day, he laid his uniform on the bed but didn't put it on. Instead, he wore a clean button-down. Slacks. A simple watch Jamal had given him for Father's Day. Around his neck, he wore the lanyard with the faded NASA badge. He looked in the mirror before leaving and almost didn't recognize the man staring back, not because he looked different, but because he looked whole. At the school, Ms. Rowe met him at the door. "Mr. Warren?" she asked, eyes scanning his face like she was trying to place it. "You're Jamal's father?" "I am," he said, offering a polite smile, "and I'm here to talk about space." The auditorium was already half full when Isaiah stepped through the side entrance. A row of folding tables lined the back wall, cluttered with poster boards and props. Toy fire helmets, plastic stethoscopes, construction helmets that looked unused. Parents milled about, prepping slideshows or nervously flipping through index cards. Jamal spotted him first. He gave a small wave, careful not to draw too much attention. Isaiah nodded in return, his heart thudding with a weight he couldn't name. His NASA badge swung gently on its cord, catching the auditorium lights every few steps. "Mr. Warren," said a staff volunteer, handing him a name tag. "You'll be third, right after the paramedic and the software developer. 10 minutes tops." He thanked her. The woman didn't recognize him, though she passed him nearly every day in the cafeteria hallway. As the first parent took the stage, Jamal sat in the third row flanked by his classmates. Kyle lounged in his seat, sneaker tapping against the chair in front. Marissa scrolled her phone under the table. No one looked toward Isaiah. He was still invisible. Then it was his turn. He stepped onto the stage without fanfare, no mic check, no music, just the quiet clearing of his throat and the soft clink of the badge settling against his chest. "My name is Isaiah Warren," he began. "I work at this school in facilities. But before that, I worked at NASA for over a decade." A rustle moved through the crowd. Not shock exactly, more like confusion. Some students turned to whisper. A teacher near the back squinted. Isaiah held up a photo, a launch pad in silhouette, dawn light cutting across the frame. "I helped design parts of the cooling systems that protect satellites in orbit," he said. "Some of the components I worked on are still out there circling the planet, maybe even above us right now." He didn't perform, didn't embellish. He spoke like he always had, low and steady, words measured like equations. But each word landed heavier than the last. He passed around diagrams, showed thermal schematics, described the math behind orbital velocity. But it was when he said, "You don't need to look like the people in the textbooks to belong in science," that the auditorium shifted. Jamal sat taller. Kyle stopped tapping his shoe. Even Ms. Rowe leaned forward, her brows knitted together. "I know some of you laughed when Jamal said I worked at NASA," Isaiah said plainly, never naming names. "That's okay. People laugh when they don't understand something. That just means there's room to learn." He let the silence hang. Then he added, "But just because you don't expect to see someone like me doing something doesn't mean it's not already happening." Another photo. Young Isaiah standing near a mission control board, arms crossed, badge visible, his skin the same tone as Jamal's. His face unlined but proud. "You don't have to prove yourself to people who already made up their minds," he said, "but you can still shine." When the session ended, the room didn't erupt into applause. It didn't need to. What followed was heavier than clapping. Stillness, eyes wide, assumptions cracking. Students didn't rush the stage, but a few glanced toward Jamal as they filed out. Not with mockery, with something closer to curiosity. Respect, even. Kyle didn't say anything as he passed Jamal, just nodded once. Outside the auditorium, Isaiah folded his diagrams into a manila folder. He moved slowly, careful not to bend the corners. His badge lay flat now, no longer swinging, as if even it understood that something sacred had happened. Ms. Rowe approached. "Mr. Warren," she said. "I had no idea." Isaiah smiled, warm but not forgiving. "That's all right. Most people don't ask." She looked like she wanted to say more, but didn't. Jamal walked up, hands in his pockets. "You killed it," he said, eyes bright. Isaiah chuckled. "That's what they say now? Killed it?" Jamal shrugged. "I mean, You did. They left side by side, the sun bright in the parking lot, the school behind them suddenly smaller. As they reached the car, Jamal turned to him. Did you mean that? What you said? About not having to prove yourself? Isaiah unlocked the door, then looked at his son. I meant every word, he said. But sometimes, proving yourself anyway? That changes more than just the room. The wind picked up, warm and full of pollen. A tree nearby dropped a single blossom to the concrete. Isaiah glanced at the sky, wide, blue, cloudless. And in that moment, the man who once launched machines into space felt something rise in him that he hadn't felt in years. Lift. The next day at school, Jamal walked through the front gates with his hoodie unzipped, his backpack slung over one shoulder. His steps weren't faster, just firmer. He didn't avoid eye contact, didn't scan the hallways like he had something to brace for. Something had shifted, not just in how they saw him, but in how he saw himself. Ms. Rowe greeted him with a nod. There was something behind her eyes, not pity, not apology, but maybe recognition. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. During science class, Jamal raised his hand. Not once, but 3 times. When asked about lunar eclipses, he not only explained the alignment, but added a detail his father had taught him. The Earth's shadow is curved. That's how ancient astronomers knew the Earth was round before they ever saw it from space. A few students blinked. One wrote it down. When class ended, Marissa approached him in the hallway. Hey, that thing your dad said about building satellite systems, that was real. Jamal looked at her, then simply nodded. Yeah, it was real. She nodded too, slowly. That's kind of amazing. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't mockery either, and sometimes that was enough. Later, during lunch, Kyle sat at the table across from Jamal's. He didn't say anything, just kept sneaking glances like he wanted to ask something, maybe couldn't figure out how. Jamal didn't offer, not out of pride, but because he knew now. The truth didn't need defending. It only needed space. That evening back home, the sky was unusually clear. Jamal set up the telescope on the balcony without being asked. Isaiah joined him, carrying 2 mugs of cocoa. I was thinking, Jamal said, adjusting the lens, maybe I'll do my science project on satellite cooling systems. Isaiah raised an eyebrow. Trying to put me out of a job already? Jamal grinned. I'm just saying how someone's got to carry on the mission. They sat together, the sounds of the city murmuring below. A car alarm, a laugh from an open window. Somewhere, a dog barked. But none of it reached them. Up here, they were orbiting something quieter. Jamal peered into the telescope again. I can see it. What? The satellite. Or, at least the reflection. It's faint, but it's there. Isaiah smiled, taking a slow sip from his mug. Faint doesn't mean weak, just means far. They sat in silence, the kind that wraps around you like warmth. In the weeks that followed, something grew in Jamal. Not loud, not flashy, just steady, like thrust under pressure. He started showing up differently, in how he listened, in how he asked questions, in how he took up space. And others noticed. It wasn't just that they'd heard what his father had done. It was that somehow seeing a black man talk about satellites and space and math without flinching, without apologizing, shifted the way they looked at possibility itself. One afternoon, Jamal found a note in his locker, just a folded piece of paper, no name. It said, "Your dad was amazing. Mine left when I was 3. Just thought you should know, I think it's cool what he did." Jamal didn't show the note to anyone. He didn't need to. Some truths didn't need to be broadcast. They just needed to land. That Friday, during free period, he took out a sheet of paper and started sketching. Not doodles, designs, something like a drone, but solar-powered. Something that could reach, record, return. His teacher passed by and paused. Planning something big? Jamal looked up, nodded once. Just following trajectory. The teacher blinked, smiled. Good phrase. That yours? Jamal thought for a moment. No, he said. It's my dad's. Sort of. Outside, the final bell rang. Students poured out, backpacks swinging, voices climbing into the sky. But inside, Jamal sat still a moment longer. Above him, the classroom's rocket poster still hung on the wall. Same flames, same launch, same flight. But now, the boy looking at it wasn't dreaming of escape. He was planning return. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't bruise. It builds. The silence of a father who chose presence over applause. Of a boy who learned that dignity doesn't need permission to speak. Of a classroom where something cracked quietly and let the light in. Jamal never became the loudest kid in school. He didn't need to. His voice carried differently now, not in volume, but in weight. He began to notice other things too. The girl who stopped raising her hand because of her accent. The boy who avoided eye contact when math was on the board. The way stories got written before anyone spoke a word. And Isaiah, he didn't go back to NASA. He didn't need to. His son now looked at him the way he used to look at launch pads. Not for what they carried, but for what they made possible. This isn't just a story about a boy and his father. It's about all the rooms where doubt has been mistaken for truth. All the quiet men holding galaxies in their hands, waiting to be seen. Because the truth is, stars don't wait for permission. They burn. They rise. They shine in silence until someone finally looks up and sees them. And if you're reading this, maybe you've been laughed at too. Maybe someone told you that your dreams didn't fit the way you looked. But here's what they never tell you. You don't have to convince anyone to believe in your sky. You just have to rise. If this story stayed with you, stick around. There are more voices like this, and voices that were almost lost in the noise, and maybe one of them sounds like yours.